Hello. Today we're going to talk about squaring a number. So what does it mean to square a number? Well, squaring, we don't like to say the square root of a number all the time. So we use this little symbol of a 2. So if I have 1 squared, I use a little 2 up there. That means to square a number. So what does that actually mean? What is 1 squared? Well, what it's actually asking you is if you have a square and each of the length of the sides are 1, what's the area of the square? So 1 squared would be 1 times 1 is 1. So 1 squared is 1. If I have 2 squared, that's saying I have a square whose length of the sides are 2. Remember, a square has the same length sides. So if I found the area, it would be 2 times 2 is 4. So 2 squared equals 4. If I have 3 squared, and you probably are catching on here to my pattern, that would be 3 length and 3 width. So the area would be 3 times 3, which equals 9. And again, if you're catching on to the pattern, you will see that 4 squared, without drawing the square, is 4 times 4, which equals 16. So squaring a number in essence means timesing it by itself. So 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. If you wanted to go one more, you could say 5 squared is, that'd be 5 times 5 is 25. Now, with every operation in math, there's what we call an inverse operation, or an operation that undoes what you've done. So if you squared a number and you want to undo it, we call that a square root. And a square root, the symbol for it you might have seen already, looks like a division bar with a check mark in front of it. And it's the opposite of squaring a number. So if I have 2 squared is 4, 2 times 2 is 4. Then if I want to go backwards, I have to take the square root of 4, which is asking you what number times itself will give you 4, and that is 2. So the square root of 4 is 2. It goes backwards. It undoes the square. So if I have 5 squared, which we said was 25, then the square root of 25 is asking you what number times itself will give you 25, and that will be 5. The most common mistake that students make is they divide it in half. So you just want to make sure that you are not dividing in half. That's not what a square root does. It's not dividing in half. So let's just practice squaring some numbers here. Remember, it's just timesing it by itself. So 6 squared would be 6 times 6, and that answer would be 36. Go ahead and pause the video and try these. Okay, hopefully you tried them and now you're just checking your work. So 8 squared is 8. Whoops, I lost my pen. 8 times 8, and that gives me 64. And 10 squared is 10 times 10, and that gives me 100. And negative 9 squared, we put this in here for a little bit of a challenge for you. That would be negative 9 times negative 9. And if you remember, when you multiply integers, 9 times 9 is 81, and a negative give you a positive 81. So let's just review here. Squaring and square roots are opposites of each other. So if I take 3 squared, that gives me 9, but the square root of 9 is 3. So you all have a foldable at your desk So we're going to fill this in together. So the first column is a list of perfect squares. This is something that will be very valuable to you as we get to the next section when we're estimating perfect squares. So the square root of what number will give you 1? Well, that's 1 times 1, and that will give you 1. So the square root of 1 is 1. And then what number times what number has the square root of 2? Well, 2 times 2 is 4. So the square root of 4 is 2. And 3 times 3 is 9. So the square root of 3 is 9. And you probably have already figured out the pattern here. 4 times 4 is 16. 5 times 5 is 25. 6 times 6 is 36. 7 times 7 is 49. 8 times 8 is 64. Scroll up here. 9 times 9 is 81. 10 times 10 is 100. 11 times 11 is 121. 12 times 12 is 144. 13 times 13 is 169. 14 times 14 is 196. 15 times 15 is 225. And I'm just going to scroll down here to get the last couple. 16 times 16 is 256. And 17 times 17 is 289. And 18 times 18 is 324. 19 times 19 is 361. And 20 times 20 is 400. Now, if you have this in your notebook, you don't have to go through and recalculate these. You could calculate them by hand by multiplying if you needed to, but if you have them in your notebook, you don't have to do that anymore. So now we're going to evaluate the square roots below. So if we look, you'll see that we have the square root of 169. Well, you can quickly look at your chart here and say, okay, the square root of 169 is 13. So that means 13 times 13 is 169. Then the square root of 81, go down looking at your perfect squares. So here's the square root of 81, and that answer is 9. The square root of 4, you might not even have to look at. You might know right away that it's 2. And then 324, all the way down here looking, you can see that it's actually 18. Another way of doing square roots is to say x squared equals 25 and solve for x. So what you're looking for is what number, remember to square a number, means to multiply it by itself. So what number times itself will give you 225? That's what it's asking. So it's the same thing as saying the square root of 225 equals what? So x squared, when they tell you to solve for x, it's still a square root. Remember, you're undoing that square there. So if I look, I can see 225 is 15. So x equals 15. And then what number times itself will give you 1? That's pretty easy. But we can look here and say, well, that would be 1 times 1. And then what number times itself will give you 400? We can go down here to 400, and we can see that x equals 20. And then what number times itself will give you 16? Be careful, it's not 8, you're not dividing. It's 4, so x equals 4. Now, each of these could be positive or negative, because positive 4 times positive 4 equals 16, and negative 4 times negative 4 equals 16. So really all of these have positive or negative. positive or negative, positive or negative, positive or negative. So keep that in mind. If it asks you what two perfect squares, that's what it's looking for, positive and negative. So this one says if the area of the square is 121 inches squared, so that means the whole area is 121 inches squared, what is the length, what is its side length? So what number, how many inches are each side so that it equals 121? So if you think about it, you take length times width, and that equals your area. So what number times itself will give you 121? Well, you can look back up to your chart and you'll see that that must be 11. So x equals 11. Now think about it. Could x equal negative 11? Well, could you have a negative length? And no, that's not possible. So in this instance, because you're solving an actual problem, you have to ask yourself, would it be positive or negative? And in this case, it would just be positive because there's no such thing as a negative 11 inches. Okay, well, hopefully you have this completed and you understand what it means to square a number versus what it means to take the square root, and that you understand what perfect squares are. We will work again next time on estimating them. Thank you.